Greetings, everyone. My name's Gegner, and I'm honored to be given the opportunity to present at this year's International Conference on Men's Issues, and I hope this presentation lives up to the standard that I've come to expect from this conference ever since I attended the very first one in 2014. I'm especially thrilled that you would choose to listen to my presentation, given that I'm not particularly well known outside of a small community which fortunately has eluded YouTube's Eye of Sauron, better known as Susan. Those of you who do know me might recognize me as the organizer of the Red Pill documentary screenings at the Twin Cities Men's Center, or as the co-host of the Gaytriarchy podcast hosted on Prince of Queens' channel before his untimely passing last year. Although my contributions to the men's rights movement and the broader manosphere pale in comparison to those of Mark Angelucci, Allison Tiemann, Mike Buchanan, or many others that I won't name due to time constraints, I'm very proud of them regardless. The common denominator among manosphere groups is characterized as a red pill. One way or another, we've all come to realize a set of truths relating to the sexes, sex itself, its history, and our culture. If a group of like-minded people all accept some family of propositions as truth, we might consider that there's some bias that has led them all there. But when the acceptance of a family of ideas results in a group as incongruous and varied as the manosphere, it adds significant weight to the things that they all consider to be incontrovertible. The noble natural response to taking the red pill is to engage in men's rights activism and advocacy, to dedicate your effort to the belief that if we raise awareness regarding these issues, then we can red pill a sufficient enough population of blue-pilled normies to then achieve some political or at least cultural progress and sensitivity to the radical notion that men are not human doings, but human beings, ends in themselves as worthy of care and concern as their female counterparts. Yet still, there are clearly observable points of departure among MRAs. The traditionalist who believes we must restore the patriarchy, the purple-pilled who suggests that feminism just went one way too far, the more idealistic egalitarian, the progressive who believes we can somehow mirror our investment in concern for women and girls, or any number of nuanced hybrids of the former, culminating in a range of perspectives that span the entire political spectrum, compass, cone, helix, soccer ball, or coffee table. And this is before we consider the rest of the manosphere, the men going their own way, the pickup artists, the masculinists, and finally, most importantly, the actual subject of this presentation, which you have generously and patiently awaited, the black-pilled involuntary celibates. Involuntary celibacy is more of a phenomenon than a movement, and there has always been some proportion of men in a given society that live and die alone, despite their desire not to. Depending on when and where you look, it is common to see that 10 to 20% of a given population never marries. Among the most extreme examples include a 30-year period in Ireland beginning around 1926, which historian Diarmaid Ferriter describes in his book Occasions of Sin. In 1926, 72% of Irishmen between the ages of 25 and 43 were unmarried, as were 53% of women of that age. In 1936, census figures indicated that 1/4 of Irish women never married, and 25% of Irish men remained permanently celibate. These trends did not alter significantly until the 1950s, meaning that Ireland had the highest rates of postponed marriage and permanent celibacy of any Western country that kept such records. He also notes that in 1955, the Ave Maria proposed jailing bachelors until they promised to find a mate within 6 months. The first known use of the term involuntary celibacy occurred 2 centuries prior in French clergyman Antoine Vanier's 3rd volume of The Mythology and Fables of the Ancients, and the term is used verbatim in a book by an anti-establishment artist and composer named Henry Flint, titled Blueprint for a Higher Civilization, in the 3rd chapter titled Creep. 13 years later, in 1988, the first online incel community, alt.support.shyness, was born, followed several years later by another forum created as a research project by a woman named Elena. It was on that forum where the term was abbreviated to Infcel and later to incel. Although these early communities were comprised of both men and women, it quickly became obvious that the male and female experiences were quite different. Today's incelosphere and its concerns are overwhelmingly male, which is why I consider it to be part of the manosphere, though others might prefer to use their words differently. Recently, the number of males experiencing states of involuntary celibacy has risen dramatically, and all signs indicate that it will only get worse. A survey published last summer, conducted from 2000 to 2018, found a dramatic rise in sexual inactivity among men aged 18 to 24 years old, such that approximately 1 in 3 men reported no sexual activity in the last year. Finnish NGO Victimhood produced these charts comparing the percentages of men and women who reported having at least 2 sexual partners in the last year. As you can see, the percentage for young men has plummeted while things have remained about the same for women, which suggests that a smaller percentage of men have more female partners, while a growing number has none. The term incel is a bit of a misnomer, since by celibate, what is often meant is that they can't get a girlfriend, not that they can't masturbate or hire a prostitute or get a love doll. Most of these men want what most people want, which is to experience authentic mutual romance, though they are often demonized as woman haters who deserve to be rejected because their sense of entitlement to women's bodies is so odious. And if they're not being depicted as angry or even dangerous, then they're being ridiculed, often by the same very compassionate and socially conscientious people who are so sensitive to avoid othering marginalized groups. And although this attitude is less prevalent among the red-pilled, it's still too common. I believe that the incelosphere is the most important group within the broader manosphere, and that the body of men's issues that is their focus is being neglected by the men's rights movement almost as much as the average person neglects men's issues as a whole. Put another way, there is a second red pill, and it is such a deep red that it is black. There are a lot of reasons that we might prefer to dismiss the concerns raised within black pill circles, not the least of which is the fact that the last thing an MRA needs is more issues to complain about. We might say that inceldom is rooted in a gynocentric perspective and therefore represents an ignorance of the big picture, or that it encourages counterproductive attitudes that ultimately produce self-fulfilling prophecies, or that the bad optics enable others to dismiss the far more legitimate concerns raised by the MRM. These avenues of dismissal are appealing because there's some truth to each of them, but that's just my nice way of saying that they don't tell the whole story. If the capital R red pill refers to the belief that characterize the manosphere, then the lowercase r red pill refers more generally to learning something that radically changes your perspective. A lowercase b black pill might refer to a general sense of hopelessness that comes with such a revelation, whereas communities of involuntary celibate males have taken ownership of the capital B black pill. Among these communities is the Black Pill Science Forum on Reddit, which makes researching these topics very easy. One of the first things I found was this helpful chart that compares blue, red, and black-pilled attitudes regarding Lookism. If you're familiar with the term Lookism, you're probably either black-pilled or old enough to remember when some issue was made of it in the 70s. The basic premise is inoffensive. Good looks are privileged over bad looks. Those who are perceived as more good-looking often benefit from it, and those with bad looks are penalized. Studies aimed at understanding the impact of looks often focus on employment, and predictably, those who led the crusade often packaged this as a women's issue. Today, we mainly see anti-Lookism expressed in the body-positive movement, whose focus among those suffering from Lookism seems to be exclusive to women and directly proportionate to their BMI. Of course, when you compare attractive women to unattractive women, we see that the attractive women are advantaged. But if we compare men and women, we often find that the woman's floor is the man's ceiling, as this study regarding obesity and hiring discrimination illustrates in this graph. So it's unsurprising that when we look at this chart, anyone red or black-pilled will be at least somewhat aware that Lookism affects men too. But the major point of departure between red and black pill theory is whether or not this matters. After all, it's widely understood that men with average looks can make themselves more desirable in other ways, especially through their ability to provide and protect. Saying it out loud may be considered impolite, but everyone knows it's true. The real question is, how true is it these days? As our society becomes less traditionalist, it's becoming more the case that women have their own money, making them less likely to select a man whose earning potential is below average. In fact, the tendency of women to marry up regarding income persists among women who earn more or are highly educated. Insofar as having a good career and the ability to reliably provide for a family was a viable strategy for a man's success in finding a wife in the past, that window is continuing to close. Likewise, as violent crime continues to fall, it follows that the premium on protection in what many theorists characterize as the sexual marketplace likewise declines. The extent to which men are no longer valued for these traits is translating to an increased importance when it comes to looks. This places a man's earning potential and his role as protector among a growing collection of dead ends that involuntary celibates are challenged with. These are often presented in the form of ignorant and dismissive platitudes, of which the most insulting are accusations of poor hygiene, an undesirable personality, a lack of confidence, or having no game. Notably, these accusations tend to be directed at people that post anonymously, and that their accusers have never met, making the popularity of such claims a bit of an enigma, as if we are expected to believe that someone might get an education, a high-paying job, go to the gym, and get plastic surgery, to become more desirable, only to have their efforts confounded by the fact that they neglected to simply take a shower. We are willing to tell men that their difficulties come from anything we can think of, anything that isn't looks, especially not those aspects of one's looks that are impossible to change. If some combination of a man's height, race, baldness, and facial features translate into a sexual death sentence, most people will tell him that the problem is anything else. He commits to improving himself in every other conceivable way, only to learn that every lead was a red herring. I believe that we have no problem telling that women that looks matter because the implication is that men are shallow. But rather than suggest that looks are important for men, a notion that carries the scandalous implication that women are shallow too, unattractive men are misdirected by endless labyrinthian platitudes. If one isn't offering one or more of these platitudes with the intention to denigrate, then the stated intention is to help him. After all, there are two things that everyone can agree on. First, it would be tragic for someone to believe there is no hope when there is. But we can also agree that it would be tragic for someone to have hope when there is none. It is a fact-intensive and high-stakes question that needs to be taken seriously. This is why it's important for Black pill communities to exist. The utility in the existence of spaces for people to share, discuss, and compare their problems is taken for granted regarding any number of other issues, whether they're physical, mental, social, cultural, circumstantial, or some combination of the aforementioned. Yet Black pill spaces have been consistently under attack. In May of this year, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network tweeted the following: "We will pay $300 for stories that expose individuals promoting or glorifying violence toward women and or terrorist attacks who are users of incel forums, sites, and chat rooms. These stories will be verified and safety precautions will be taken before publication. Let's get to work." A year and a half earlier, the website incels.me was suspended by the domain registrar. It now features a single page with a message from the site's owner. Almost making it to a second year, incels.me was suspended by the registry on October 15, 2018, without warning, even after doing what the registry asked. They never intended to give them a chance to comply with their ridiculous and unreasonable demands, and that's why they were given them. He later claims that the unethical tactics utilized to take it down included abuse complaints to Cloudflare, the domain registrar, and the hosting provider, network attacks, attempted hacks, and smears of this website in the news. Perhaps these attacks are the natural continuation of a legacy manifested in predatory bachelor laws that taxed older, unmarried men, or the Spartan penal laws requiring such men to march naked in the public square in winter while singing of their dishonor. Now, just as the red pill in regard to men's issues is a vast and complicated series of issues that couldn't possibly be summarized in a single presentation that does it justice, The black pill, likewise, can't be completely explained here. And even if I were afforded limitless time, preparation, and attention, I am not the most qualified to do so. I'm both an outsider and a newcomer, and I'm drawing heavily from the research and the ideas of others, including posts from incels.co, the Black Pill Science subreddit that I mentioned earlier, the articles on incels.wiki, as well as YouTubers such as Face and LMS and Incel TV. Their contributions to our understanding of gendered issues are indispensable, and my aim is to motivate anyone who expresses concern for men's issues to seriously and respectfully listen to what they have to say, so that the black pill perspective can inform the MRM. I hope this might also motivate some of the black pill to consider engaging in various forms of men's rights activism and advocacy as well. Besides the changes that come with the erosion of traditional families, online dating has had a dramatic effect. In a 2019 paper titled A Rejection Mindset, Choice Overload in Online Dating, the authors concluded that the findings of all three studies showed support for our main hypothesis that a higher number of partner options sets off a rejection mindset. People become increasingly likely to reject potential partners to the extent that they are presented with more options. In all studies, women became increasingly likely to reject potential partners, while for men this effect was either similar in study 2, weaker in the first study, or not significant at all in the third study. In study 2, the likelihood of finding a match only significantly decreased for women. Predictably, the expansion of options that has come with the growing prevalence of online dating has amplified this effect. The Pew Research Center published a study earlier this year revealing that now 30% of the American population uses one or more online dating services, a nearly threefold increase from 2013. It also showed that women were 5 times more likely to report that they'd received too many messages, while men were over twice as likely to say they hadn't received enough. When journalist John Millward set up his own experiment comparing the messages received from 10 profiles, half male, half female, with similar names but different photos that were otherwise identical, he found that the female profiles' inboxes were filled within 2 months, and that even the least attractive women received more messages than the men. I remember the first time I saw someone open Tinder and immediately swipe right on every profile. Won't he just end up with way too many matches? The women and gays ask. The answer is no, he will not. Now, you might remember several years ago, a McDonald's job ad went viral for requiring a bachelor's degree, though the owner of that franchise claimed it wasn't real. Regardless, the notion seems ridiculous, even scandalous. But it's not McDonald's fault that she's a young, moderately attractive woman with a respectable career, a full inbox on OkCupid, and more Tinder matches than she knows what to do with. Should we expect her to choose the most impressive option, or to aim for the middle? Many blackpillers have performed their own Tinder experiments, creating fake profiles with different photos to compare the number of matches and messages they receive. Remarkably, a man with an exceptionally attractive photo will still be bombarded with messages, even when the user deliberately conveys undesirable personality traits, such as a lack of confidence, mental illness, and even overt racism. In another experiment, a profile of a very old woman pulled more messages than the user could even keep up with, which presents a considerable challenge to the red pill truism that women hit the wall in their 30s and are then desperate to find a man. Although this holds up when comparing older versus younger women, the actual impact on a woman's ability to find a man is generally overestimated. Similar to the impact of obesity, a woman's floor is a man's ceiling. An undeniable aspect of a man's attractiveness to women is his height. This notion is justified at every level, whether it is experience, conventional wisdom, or research. Most women want a man that is at least 6 feet tall, regardless of her own height. Globally, the average height of an adult male is 5 foot 9 inches. The countries with the tallest men are Denmark, Germany, Norway, and France, where the average man is 5 foot 11 inches. In the United States, only 14.5% of men are over 6 feet tall, and only 3.9% of men are 6'2" or taller. When author and journalist Malcolm Gladwell collected data on half the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, he found that 30% were over 6'2". This Huffington Post piece lists 10 advantages of being tall, which include higher pay, being perceived as more confident, more intelligence and productivity, and lower risk for heart disease and dementia. But for many men, the most important reason that they would prefer to be taller is that not enough women will date a man who is 5'6" or shorter under any circumstances, and men who fall between 5'6" and 5'9" are still at a significant disadvantage. Some men even opt for painful and dangerous limb-lengthening surgery to gain a few inches. Often, the difficulty endured by shorter men is made worse by his ethnicity. Data from dating websites consistently reveals the racial preferences of men and women. Most people tend to prefer to date white people or someone of the same race. It's also common for men to have a preference favoring Asian women, and for women to avoid Asian men. The strongest trend in racial preference appears to be Asian women's rejection of Asian men. When NORC at the University of Chicago conducted their general social survey, they created these charts showing the percentage of each ethnic group who had no sexual activity in the last year. You can see a dramatic increase among Asian men that surpassed 30% by 2015. As for the ladies, there's a general decrease, though it is noteworthy that the rate for Black women increased to roughly 15%. This paper, produced by 2 professors at the University of Chicago and 1 from MIT, analyzed data from an online dating service and included tables that measure different qualities in terms of income trade-offs. All things being equal, an Asian male needs to earn $247,000 more per year than an otherwise identical white man. This data also speaks to the importance of height and facial attractiveness, but it suggests that race has a greater impact. Now, quite a lot has been made of sexual racism in gay dating. Many gay men share their traumatic experiences on Grindr, where he checks the profile of a handsome white man, only to have his hopes dashed by the dreaded 14 words. Vanilla only, please. No rice, no spice, no beans, no chocolate, and no curry. Imagine the horror of being limited to hundreds of sexual partners in one's lifetime when it should have been thousands. But wouldn't it be awkward if a study from UC Irvine on racial ethnic exclusion among gay, lesbian, and heterosexual white online daters revealed that gay men are the least guilty of this? White heterosexual women were found to be the most exclusive overall. Specific facial features and their overall symmetry also play an important role. According to the research of Alan Slater of the University of Exeter, newborn babies prefer faces that are more attractive. The babies not only recognized faces, but demonstrated a preference for specific features that are considered attractive. The Children's Research Laboratory at the University of Texas conducted an experiment describing the response of 60 newborns to a stranger in the presence of their mother. The attractiveness of the stranger was manipulated with lifelike masks designed to make her more or less attractive without appearing disfigured or strange. And they found that the infants more frequently avoided her when she was unattractive, and that boys were more likely to approach her when she was wearing the attractive mask. Considering the fact that our ability to recognize faces appears to be centralized to a specific small portion of our brains, the fusiform face area, roughly the size of a blueberry, we should seriously consider that perceived facial attractiveness is innate. The popular alternative is the belief in a media-driven conspiracy that globally brainwashes us into identifying high cheekbones, thick eyebrows, hunter eyes, minimal upper eyelid exposure, white teeth, pronounced jaws, and masculine brow ridges as attractive features. While it is possible to seek out the dissidents who condemn women's use of makeup as fake-up, as a practice that deceives men by presenting a face that appears more young, healthy, and beautiful than it really is, the dominance of beauty vlogging and makeup tutorials on YouTube suggests that this industry and practice is anything but stigmatized. Many have suggested that the forces that discourage men from engaging in similar practices, sometimes referred to as looksmaxing, is at least partially based on women's fear that a man might cheat his genetics and the subsequent impact that would have on her offspring. There is a show on Netflix called Haters Back Off, which features a character played by Colleen Ballinger named Miranda, who bears some resemblance to Molly Shannon's character in the 1999 film Superstar. The characters are awkward, goofy, cartoonish, and in the case of Miranda, extremely rude, self-important, and suffering with delusions of grandeur. I've come to appreciate it as a Femcel, female incel minstrel show, which I really enjoyed but would not recommend, and that's why I'm going to spoil the end of the first season, but you're probably boycotting Netflix anyway. Throughout the show, Miranda ignores the guy who's interested in her because she's only interested in the more handsome, more popular boy. She accepts his invitation to sing at his CD release party and led to believe that he will propose to her, only to learn that it was all a big joke. As the audience laughs at her terrible singing, Miranda asks them, in earnest, why they are laughing, and begs them to stop, eventually screaming at them, "Why is it funny? Why is it so funny that someone would love me?" Even for a character who is largely the author of her own misfortune is very sad. How much more tragic would it have been if she were presented out of character, with average looks and a normal personality, and still found herself to be involuntarily celibate? Barring the difficult topic of what a men's rights movement could reasonably do to solve these problems, one might ask whether this is truly a men's issue to begin with. Are femcells a thing? The short answer is no, not really. Men primarily select based on looks and personality, but even a woman who is disfigured or morbidly obese can find a man if she lowers her standards. This 2012 Forbes article describes the plight of successful, ambitious, and highly educated millennial women who have managed to achieve everything they've dreamed of, except a husband. She writes, "It's not as if we are holding out for Jake Gyllenhaal, but we do have certain non-negotiable expectations for potential mates that include college degrees and white-collar jobs. Life has always gone according to our plans, so why wouldn't we land a man with these reasonable requirements?" You'll often find that women who complain about their prospects are seeking dateable men. Quite a lot is packaged in that term, dateable. Not any man, and in the world of online dating, where a limitless pool of potential partners can be filtered by dozens of criteria, the notion that a woman might consider settling is simply scandalous. But the relative choosiness of women is much more thoroughly illuminated by the great femcel panic that occurred during the American Civil War. This article describes the war's effects on marriage patterns in great detail, as well as the popular fear that women would not be able to find suitable partners as a result of so many men dying, which Vanity Fair parodied in 1862. Demographers seem to have taken for granted that the loss of 1 in 5 military-aged men would justify these concerns. Instead, the war's impact on marriage patterns by 1880 were no longer evident, and 92% of young Southern white women were able to secure husbands, demonstrating in no uncertain terms that women really are the primary victims of war. The article describes the predictable manner by which this crisis in gender was avoided. People, particularly Southern women, may have stopped writing about marriage after the war simply because the fears of spinsterhood expressed during the war were not realized. It is also possible that fears of spinsterhood spurred women to accept unconventional suitors, men who were younger, much older, of a lower social class, from a distant community, or of a different ethnic group, and thus reduced what would otherwise have been a larger cohort of unmarried women. So while women are faced with the dreadful proposition of whether or not she must relax her standards regarding height, age, race, or diploma, a truly involuntarily celibate man may consider relaxing his standards regarding sexuality itself, a practice called gay coping, or taking the gay pill. More extreme options include tranny maxing, where the man who cannot get a girlfriend becomes the girlfriend, or castrate maxing to reduce or eliminate the sex drive altogether. As bizarre and dramatic as this sounds to most people, increased trends in each of these alternatives are real possibilities. It speaks to both the severity of the problem and the poverty of solutions. It stands to reason that we should begin with the truth. We should avoid downplaying the importance of physical appearance and its effects on our overall well-being. Men who invest in improving their appearance up to and including cosmetic surgery should not be looked down upon, and their involvement in communities that share and discuss information allowing them to accurately assess their options should be encouraged. As a final note, you may have noticed that at no point in this presentation have I responded to the mainstream narrative regarding incels, nor have I dredged up the familiar names that people invoke to smear these men as terrorists and predators. I've avoided this intentionally, as I believe that absolutely no group, when held to this standard of guilt by association, compares favorably to incels. That, in light of what I have presented regarding the actual prevalence of inceldom, they are statistically underrepresented. The real monsters are those who perpetuate that narrative, many of whom are journalists that have, as grown adults, made schoolyard bullying their bread and butter. And, like a bully, they are cowards who have naturally sought out the world's undesirables, singling out those who are already perennially single, targeting a vulnerable class of people despite and because they know they have the least social power. The threat narrative against incels is among the most vile and contemptible in all of human history. Just as the men's movement did not wait for men as a class to ask it for the help they desperately need, it shouldn't wait for the incels either. If you are someone who has challenged others to defend those most easily demonized or ignored, who will, without hesitation, point to the injustices suffered by those who society prefers to simply use up than dispose of, then I hope I've made this clear. To white knight for the black pill is your duty. Inceldom must not be overlooked or explained away or shuffled off into the manosphere's disappointments room. Incels should be approached with respect and understanding, and their experience and their knowledge should be elevated, centered, and defended. Thank you.